Welcome back to the Nextgen Summer Bible Study series. I hope you have enjoyed listening to these. So this week we're going to be in 1 Samuel. Next week we're going to take a break, and then we're going to kick off a Nextgen Fall series. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when it comes closer. But if you want to study with me this week, we're going to be in 1 Samuel, but we're going to be jumping around. So if you just want to listen, we'll be in chapters 18, 19, and 23. Our point is don't let cultural expectations define your role. We're going to be talking about Jonathan this week. So let's start in 1 Samuel 18, verses 1 through 4. When David had finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan was bound to David in close friendship and loved him as much as he loved himself. Saul kept David with him from that day on and did not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as much as himself. And then Jonathan removed the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his military tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. So, Jonathan had already proven himself. He was Saul's oldest son and first in line to sit on his father's throne. This had always been Saul's desire, and Saul even told Jonathan later that every day Jesse's son lives on earth, you and your kingship are not secure. Now send for him and bring him to me. He must die. But Jonathan was already secure in who he was, and he didn't need to be king to be fulfilled. And Jonathan was a leader and oversaw 1/3 of Saul's army. He was a fighter who was willing to be bold in battle. This was because he trusted in God. Because of his commitment to David, Jonathan was willing to give up what rightly belonged to him. The throne was Jonathan's birthright. He had earned this right on the battlefield, yet in selfishness and humility, Jonathan was willing to give it all to David. Jonathan gave David his robe and military tunic, his sword, bow, and belt. This was symbolic of his giving his throne over to David. More than tradition or politics, Jonathan was concerned with God's purposes being carried out. He knew that it was God's will for David to be the king. So today, many people are concerned with what they want for themselves or what others might think. Let's make sure we act as Jonathan and humbly seek God's will above all else. Let's not be pressured by the people around us to be something we're not. Instead, we should be who God says we are. So, how are you making sure that you are who God wants you to be and are not being pressured into something you're not? So just think about that through this first set of verses this week. Now let's go to chapter 19 in 1 Samuel 1 through 4. Saul ordered his son Jonathan and all his servants to kill David, but Saul's son Jonathan liked David very much. So he told him, "My father Saul intends to kill you. Be on your guard in the morning and hide in a secret place and stay there. I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are and talk to him about you. When I see what he says, I'll tell you." Jonathan spoke well of David to his father, Saul. He said to him, "The king should not sin against his servant David. He hasn't sinned against you. In fact, his actions have been a great advantage to you." So tensions had been building in Saul's court. He was drunk with rage. Saul had sought to use his daughters to trap and kill David. He promised the oldest daughter, Merab, to David for fighting the Philistines, and Saul fully expected that David would die in battle. However, David came out unscathed, and Saul backed out on the deal. He then promised his younger daughter, Michal, to David if he killed 200 Philistines. Once again, David returned victorious. He survived every trap set by Saul and became increasingly clear that the Lord was truly with David. Jonathan was honest with David and told him exactly what his father was planning. Keeping secrets can create mistrust and do great damage to a friendship. And as David's friend, Jonathan felt compelled to warn David. Jonathan also wanted to work on a positive solution for David, so he agreed to talk to his father. Jonathan was respectful, and he humbly shared his heart's convictions about the situation. He pointed out that David was honorable, had won victories for Israel, and his service had benefited Saul personally. Further, David was innocent, and to harm him would be wrong. Saul listened to Jonathan's advice and swore that he would give up trying to harm David. The situation was diffused for now. Acting in good faith, Jonathan worked out a deal, and David returned to King Saul's service. Sadly, the truce was short-lived. So question number 4 in the study says, how can we know when it's appropriate to share sensitive information versus keeping it quiet and confidential? So we see the trust Jonathan and David had in sharing this information. And another one was, when have you found yourself in the middle of a conflict between people you care about? So now we're going to jump again to chapter 23 in 1 Samuel 15 through 18. David was in the wilderness of Ziph and Horish when he saw that Saul had come out to take his life. Then Saul's son Jonathan came to David in Horish and encouraged him in his faith in God, saying, "Don't be afraid, for my father Saul will never lay a hand on you. You yourself will be king over Israel, and I'll be your second in command. Even my father Saul knows it is true." Then the two of them made a covenant in the Lord's presence. Afterward, David remained in Horish while Jonathan went home. So Jonathan and David were facing a real battle and needed to arm themselves. There was a clear calling on David's life, and Jonathan was willing to walk this journey alongside his friend, even if it meant turning against his own father. So they armed themselves emotionally and relationally by surrounding themselves with moral support. When David was in the wilderness of Ziph and facing the constant assaults on his life, Jonathan came to encourage him in the faith. Although Jonathan would never get the opportunity to serve a crowned David, he was content to be in the supportive role, and Jonathan completely accepted God's will for his life. Sometimes people see serving in another's shadow as inferior or insulting, yet Jonathan was fulfilled and at peace doing exactly what God wanted. Nothing can compare to living in obedience with God's calling. What does our culture often see serving in a supportive role as an inferior position? Well, so many times our selfish intentions take over when we see a friend or a coworker get that position that you longed or worked hard for, and then jealousy, turns on, and instead of being supportive, you're envious, you're angry, you're mad. Instead of being obedient to God and what He's called you to do, and instead of being supportive and encouraging, you let rage take over, and then maybe you try to harm their position, or you talk behind their back, or you talk behind them. But you want to be in the encourager, because maybe they were placed in that spot for a reason, and maybe you're still in your spot for you to grow, or to be called into another position, or to be called as an encourager to those that keep growing. So people are created as moral beings and are responsible for their choices and the resulting consequences, including the ways they treat others. So this week, 2 things. Take time every day this week to ask God to give you direction about how He wants you to live. And does your church need volunteers in the kids ministry? Does your church need help cleaning or taking care of the property? Find ways to start serving in your church. It doesn't just have to be attending church. Find areas in the church where you can start to grow and start to maybe figure out where you love to serve. Kids ministry, the nursery. Do you like to play instruments? Do you like to help? In any kind of ministry. So be an encourager. Be a Jonathan. Even if that means sometimes elevating somebody else and being that encourager, even though you were set out on whatever that position was. So thank you for listening to the Nextgen Summer Bible Study Series. I'm excited about the fall series coming up. We'll change it up a little bit, and we'll continue to study the Bible, but we'll just change directions on our topics of study. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.